You're listening to Beyond Borders, the Immigration Evaluation Podcast, the go-to podcast for mental health professionals who want to be expert immigration evaluators. I'm your host, Dr. Mariela Shibley, and I'm here to help you turn your expertise into impact. Let's get started. Today, I'm excited to welcome Gabrielle Bryan, LCSW, to the podcast. Gabrielle is a clinical social worker and retired Army behavioral health officer who has conducted hundreds of assessments throughout her career. She entered the immigration field after assisting one of the Army's Iraqi translators with an asylum case. And since then, she's dedicated her practice entirely to immigration evaluations. Gabrielle has trained extensively as an immigration behavioral health provider. She collaborates with organizations like Physicians for Human Rights and Legal Aid of New Jersey, and she is recognized as an expert witness in federal immigration court. She's based in Pennsylvania, where her clinical practice focuses solely on providing clear, accurate, and compassionate immigration evaluations. So here's our interview. So thank you so much for meeting with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise, your experience with immigration evaluations, and especially with testimony. You bring such a unique perspective. So I'm really excited for us to just dive into it. So to start us off, I'd love for the audience to get to know you a little bit better. So could you share a little bit about your professional background, how you found your way into immigration evaluations, that kind of stuff?
I'm a retired Army behavioral health officer. I spent 20 years on active duty as a clinical social worker. I started doing immigration evaluations by accident. We had several interpreters that worked with us when I was stationed in Iraq that were applying for citizenships under the SIGS program. And my boss said to me, "You write well. Can you help me, beef up these appeals?" Because at that time they were sort of a petition. It wasn't a formal process. You had to write a petition about the capacity that the interpreter had worked with you and what they brought to the unit, why you thought they would be trustworthy as a United States citizen. So I did that and I forgot about it. Like we all came home. He did get his citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband, who is a nurse and a social worker, was looking for CEUs. And he said, there's this course on immigration. You should take it. You need a lot of CEUs. And we have young kids. And I was like, oh, okay. So I ended up taking it. And that's sort of how I started doing immigration evaluations.
And where were you getting your referrals?
I sent out some emails locally, and it took a little bit, I'd say about 6 months. And then all of a sudden it was like, as soon as I did one, it was off to the races.
Okay. And so you shared your experience in the military service. How do you think that experience sort of shaped the way that you approach this kind of forensic work?
We do a lot of evaluations in the military. We do them for top secret clearances. We do them for certain weapons. We do them just to determine if someone is stable enough to go back to their unit or stable enough to be deployed. So I don't think I was particularly intimidated by an evaluation because I'm used to doing them. They were just slightly different. So once I got a format down, it wasn't a lot different than what I had done in the Army.
Mm-hmm. And working with immigration attorneys, was that any different than what you were used to?
We work very closely in military social work with JAG, who are attorneys.
Can you explain what JAG is?
Sure. Judge Advocate Generals. They are the military's lawyers. You see them on shows like NCIS.
Mm-hmm.
There used to be a JAG show, but I don't think it went anywhere. But we work very closely with legal in the Army, especially when we're processing people to be chaptered out, which is meaning the military is ending their term of service. So I'm used to attorneys, and we also sit on a lot of the same committees. One of the nice things that the military has done in the last decade is they've really expanded their services to sexual assault victims. And because of that, our JAG officers actually do internships with big city police departments and the legal teams for the district attorney, which is really neat. And they all really enjoy it. And then they bring those skills back as a special victims person, just like you would see on Special Victims Unit on TV. And so they work very closely with social workers. So I'm used to attorneys.
If
that makes sense.
Sure. And so then you started your private practice.
Yes.
And at some point you decided, this is all I'm going to do, immigration evaluations. Is that right?
Yes, primarily because I was tired. After 20 years of seeing, 12 to 14 service members a day, I knew that private practice wasn't going to be for me in terms of, where a client would come to my office for therapy. I was pretty burned out. But I really do like one-time contacts or two-time contacts. That type of time-limited patient evaluation is fine with me. It doesn't seem to move my needle very much in terms of burnout. It's more long-term therapy that is tiring for me.
I see. Okay. So, all right. So now that we have sort of a sense of your background, I'd love to hear about your journey into testifying in immigration court. What do you remember about your first experience testifying?
I was thinking about that. I think I was terrified. No, one of the things that I think I should probably say is that military officers take turns going to court for a variety of different things. So court is not an unfamiliar thing, but I didn't know what to expect. And I was really scared. I remember, not sleeping the night before. And the judge really asked me only like 3 questions about my evaluation. And I was very relieved.
What type of case was it?
It was an asylum.
Okay. Okay.
I do a lot of detainee work, primarily because Pennsylvania, my state, has several detention centers. You have not been able to go in person to evaluate people since COVID. So everything we do is by Zoom. So, and that's well known with the immigration judges that see cases from Pennsylvania. All our immigration court is in Philadelphia, and we all do it remotely. So they know that we are not able to, we're not even allowed to go to the detention centers. And I was facilitating a group on Wednesday, and there was a clinician from DC, and she said the same thing. Like, I'm not allowed to go in person either. Not on the East Coast. She said when she has license in many states. So she's like, when I'm in Texas, I can go personally. But when I am in the East Coast, they don't allow it.
But you've been in person to immigration court.
I have not been in person in immigration court.
Oh, that's interesting.
I've only done it on WebEx.
Only on WebEx. Okay. But for the military court, did you go in person or you are in person? Okay. So is it kind of similar? So immigration court is very different than like federal court or state court, right? And the setup and the people who are there and the whole format, even the judge. How is it? But I would imagine, knowing what I know about military court, it's somewhat similar in that sense.
It is. It is similar. The difference is in the military court is the judge can call a recess. Immigration court, it tends to be more time limited because they have so many cases to get through. Military has a little bit more luxury with time. So if they decide to call a recess or, a juror needs a break, they can do it. We're not usually on as time fixed as immigration court. Immigration court is very much rapid fire. Boom, boom, boom. Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
That has been my experience. And maybe other people spend a lot of time waiting. Now, I recently sat in an immigration WebEx where the judge allowed all of the witnesses into the courtroom. So on WebEx, what you do is you sit in a virtual waiting room until you're called. And then you go in when it's your client's turn. This judge said, all right, all attorneys, all witnesses, we're just going to open court and you're all stuck here. So I was a fly on the wall for, I think they probably adjudicated like 70 cases before they got to mine.
Oh my God.
So it was really interesting. And we could talk more about what I saw. I actually took notes. I was like, well, I'm sitting here. I might as well take notes and, give people feedback about what I'm seeing.
Yeah. Tell us.
But that is really unprecedented. I've never seen that before. Usually you're in your little virtual room and you could do other work until it's your turn.
Right. And when you go in person, it's the same thing. You wait in the lobby, in the waiting room, right? Along with everybody else until you are called for that, if you are called, which is also the reason why so many of us just show up and wait and wait and wait and then just, we don't get called in.
And that's frustrating because it's a day of lost work.
Exactly. Well, there's all these issues. Do you charge for that? Do you not charge for that?
Right.
But in your case, pretty much every time you've sat in that virtual waiting room, you've always testified? Or has that ever happened that they said, actually, never mind?
When they get to my case, the attorney says, the judge read your report. They don't have any further questions. So that has happened to me a bunch of times.
So I guess the benefit is you're in your office or at home, you're doing other things, right? When you're
Correct.
on that virtual waiting room.
I'm usually writing another person's evaluation.
Great.
Because it's like a dead room. It's just like a waiting room. I can't hear or see anybody else. And usually what happens is the attorneys I work with will give me a text, like if there's a change in the lineup. So maybe there's somebody who has another case that day who's an attorney, and they'll try to put them first so that they can be excused to go to their next case. So sometimes we get a text like, hey, we've been pushed back an hour because somebody else has trial.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, I was gonna ask, so do they give you a heads up, like, "Hey, we're next," or something so that
Yes.
you can gather your things and not be in the middle of chewing your sandwich when they call on you?
One time I was walking my dog. We were 4 hours early. And they're like, "We're going now." And I'm like, So I actually did an interview. I did court and ran back to my house. Like, it's a good, like, my face was flushed. It was that, but that has never happened again. And it was just because the judge had something in their personal life that they had to get to.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I know that there is you can, I've had attorneys request that we go first because they have a witness that has to leave or something like that. So it is something that you can discuss with the attorney ahead of time and say, "Hey, can you see if we can be towards the top of the hour?" Right?
Or even just let me know where you think we're going to be in the lineup. So I
Mhm.
have like more, I can plan my day around it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because if I'm writing a report, I don't always charge a client while I'm sitting in the WebEx unless I'm actively like stuck there like I was for the one where they opened for everybody. If I can do other work, I'm not going to charge you. But if your work is my exclusive work for the day, then I will. And that's kind of how I do that.
Mhm. Mhm. But you're not charging, so you shared with me before that most of your referrals are from a nonprofit, is that correct?
That's correct.
So the nonprofit is paying you, it's not the actual clients.
Right. Except for the poor girl who's was the case that I referenced where they let everybody into the waiting room. I felt so bad because it wasn't a nonprofit and I know she doesn't have a lot of money.
Oh,
So I
no.
think I took a couple $100 off my fee just because I felt bad for her. It was not her fault. There's nothing
Mhm.
she could have anticipated. I've never seen that happen before.
And when was that?
That was in May.
So kind of
This
recently.
May.
And it hasn't happened since?
No,
Because I wonder if that's like a new trend or something like that.
it was New York State. So as you know, or you're California, and on the East Coast, mostly we see immigration from my cases go to either New York, Trenton, or Philly. Once in a blue moon, I'll get a judge who is way out of our area. So, in other words, there's such a backlog that they can't get through. So they'll divert the case to Miami and everybody's on WebEx. So it doesn't really matter. It's not like we're asking the attorney or the client to fly to Miami. So that does happen occasionally, but that was the only time I've ever seen them open and make everybody sit in the courtroom while things were going on.
Hmm. Now that sort of sparked a question that I imagine a lot of people would have. We can't practice in states where we are not licensed, but when it comes to testifying, can you explain like why you would be able to testify in another
Sure.
state?
Because first of all, you have no jurisdiction over an immigration court. And we all know as providers that there's a massive backlog in immigration court. It
Mhm.
is federal. So as long as you have a valid state license in any court, you're not seeing a client in that courtroom. You are
Right.
testifying about your evaluation.
Mhm.
Very different.
Exactly. Okay, great. So, what is it like? I'm imagining is that I've done telephonic testimony, but never of. So I'm assuming this is video, right? So you can
It
see
is
them, they
video.
can see you.
It is, I think there's a little bit more of a sense of humor. Like, I did a case that was out of Philly, and it was a really stormy day here in Pennsylvania, and everybody was struggling. The judge was struggling, the attorneys were struggling on the WebEx, the client was struggling because everybody's internet kept flickering on and off. So the judge said, "Okay, everybody turn off your cameras. Let's see if we can get enough bandwidth to get through this."
So is the judge in the courtroom or is the judge also in his office?
He is in the courtroom wherever they are.
Okay.
So you could see like the Justice Department little seal behind his head,
Mhm.
and you know where they're located, and it'll say like, "Welcome to Judge Smith's courtroom." Please
I
type
see.
in your name.
And what about the respondent, the client?
They are usually, it depends on the client. Sometimes they're at home, but usually they're with their attorney at whatever legal office they're at.
So they're physically together.
Yeah, they're together.
Mhm, mhm. So what are some well, I guess you said you never testified in person, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so you can't really speak to what advantages or challenges you've noticed, but maybe you can speak to any, like, challenges that you've noticed,
Well,
having to testify virtually.
technology is one of them.
Mhm.
As I mentioned with the storm on the East Coast, we were all struggling. And you could see, like, in the judge's chambers, the lights were flickering on and off in the video, so, and I was pleased with the judge because at least he acknowledged, like, hey, we're all having tech difficulties. If we cut out, here is a phone number. If we cut out, we'll go to the telephones. So I thought that, showed a lot of flexibility on his behalf. Like, let's just get this done. We'll do it however we can.
Mhm, mhm. So kinda more play it by ear.
Play it by ear, outside of the box thinking, because we're all within probably 200 miles and, East Coast, everything is very tight. I live 15 minutes from the New Jersey border, just to give you an example.
Mhm,
So, we're compact here. We're not wide open spaces like you might be if you were testifying in Montana virtually.
mhm. Right, right, right.
So we were all struggling with the same weather pattern.
And I would imagine also, in comparing to my experience testifying in person, well, first of all, you can have as many notes as you want, whereas when you go to court, you can pretty much you're pretty limited as to what you can bring in with you. It has to be things that everybody else has access to. And when you're referring back to your report, which ideally you would memorize most of it, when you are virtual, nobody knows whether you're staring at the camera or the screen has your report and you can easily refer back to it, right?
I will actually say I have my report right in front of me. Like, sometimes the government attorney will say, on page 12, you said blah, blah, blah. So then I could quick find it and be like, can you expand upon what you meant here? And then I'm happy to do it because I have it right in front of me.
So
It
can you
doesn't
share
happen that often, but it
Mhm.
has happened.
That they refer to a specific page?
Mhm.
Mhm. So what are some typical questions that you get asked?
A lot of questions about the client's upbringing, how it may affect, the decisions that they have made. So a lot of the detainees that I see are people who are undocumented, but have also committed minor crimes. So
Mhm.
they do have a charge sheet. And the
Mhm.
attorneys and I go through the charge sheet as part of our trial prep, just in case they may ask me a question about a charge. It doesn't happen very often, but for example, I did a teenage boy, well, he's now a young man, he's in his 20s now, who was homeless when he came to the United States and was breaking into cars. He would smash the windows out so he could have a place to sleep.
Mhm.
And they asked me questions about, why do you think that, so and so did this? And I was able to answer those questions based on his background. And unfortunately, he was a victim of gang rape in Honduras. Why do you think he has trouble with authority? Because, when he went to the police in Honduras, he was not protected. So I was able to talk about those things. So those are a lot of questions. Sometimes they ask me questions about a diagnosis. You know, you describe schizoaffective disorder. What does this mean in layman's terms? When you're reading the report, I do describe it, but not everybody gets to hear what my description is. The government attorney may not understand what it means. I have found that a lot of attorneys are not very well versed in mental health diagnoses. So they
Mhm.
may say schizoaffective disorder, is that like schizophrenia? And then you have to explain the difference.
Okay.
So that's kind of some of the questions that they ask.
Mhm. Mhm. Now, usually it always starts with a voir dire, right? Where they go over what qualifies you as an expert. And what's that like for you? You are an LCSW, and I know a
That's
lot of
correct.
people with LCSWs or LPCCs or MFTs, they get a little anxious because they feel like, oh, they're going to attack my credentials because I'm not, a physician or I'm a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
I don't really struggle with that. And probably it's because of my background and having command time. You own the stage that you're on. You
Mm.
are the subject matter expert in that moment. The attorney is not the subject matter expert for either the government or the client. The client's not the subject matter expert, so I am. And I'm comfortable and confident enough in my abilities to be that expert in that minute.
Yeah, that's one thing that when I coach people about testifying, I say, you have to remember that, first of all, you're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong. And your role there is really to help, to educate, to help the adjudicator make an informed decision. So you have information and expertise that nobody else in that room has. And, because we are prone to feel somewhat like I shouldn't be here, I'm not qualified. What are some things that perhaps have you heard other clinicians mention to you about testifying?
What if they tear apart my schooling, which I have never had that happen. What if they ask me something I don't know? And I always just say, it's okay to say, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is outside my scope of practice. I don't know. For example, I never comment about recidivism. It's beyond my scope of practice. That's not what I'm assessing. I'm not forensic, and I'm happy to say that. If you want to know if Raul is going to rape somebody, you need to find a forensic psychologist. That is not me.
Or a psychic.
Yeah, that
Because
too.
I can tell you, as a forensic psychologist, I can't predict that either.
Yeah. But you have better tools to do it. So
Right.
I'm really comfortable with saying, that's not my area. And I think a little bit that comes back to the military is we're trained. If you don't know, you don't know. And
That's
it's
right.
okay to say it.
Yes. Because if you start guessing, it goes down. It can go down a rabbit hole.
It makes you look much less credible if you guess. So it's
Sure.
better just to say, I don't know.
Right.
One thing I would want to say to clinicians who are concerned about court is ask the attorney for a trial prep.
Yes. So let's talk about that. So prior to the testimony, how do you prepare for that?
So when I work with nonprofits, nonprofit attorneys have more time. So I'm going to say that that has been my experience. All of the nonprofit attorneys I have a lot of time. And they're more flexible with the information that they share. And so they will give me the questions because they have to give it to the judge ahead of time for their cross so the government attorney can see it. These are the questions we're going to ask you, and we actually practice each answer.
Right. And so the attorney for your client can tell you what questions they're going to ask you. They can't tell you what you should say, but they can tell you what they're going to ask you. Right. But you don't know what the other attorney is going to ask you, and that's where the anxiety kicks in, right?
And that's where the anxiety came. But you do know that it's going to be related to the questions on the page. Some people, and it is also okay as a clinician to say, I don't like testifying. If I take your case, I'm not available for this. Comes up in a group that I lead all the time. And it's okay to set the boundary, I do not want to go to court, or I only want to go to court for blah, blah, blah. That is up to you. And you can say, I just don't feel comfortable testifying. And, they can't force you.
Now, if somebody asks, well, what if you get subpoenaed by the judge?
I've never been subpoenaed ever.
Yeah. I don't think that really exists in immigration court. Although I did hear, I'm trying to remember who told me that. I mean, technically you could get subpoenaed, but it's never happened to me. Clearly, it's never happened to you. Yeah. So it's usually, it helps the client's case if they can ask questions. If they don't have that ability to ask further questions, they're going to adjudicate with the information that they have, period. And if it's not enough, then they might throw out the report or diminish its weight in the decision-making progress, right? But it's not like you are going to get in trouble because you didn't want to testify.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about compassion from judges. I worked with a client. I worked with him. I've evaluated him twice. They wanted me to see him a third evaluation, which no, but who does not testify well. He's extremely emotional. We call him the high-pitched crier. And so at one point in the his most recent court, he started screaming, "Deport me, deport me, deport me." Oof. The judge understood that he was at his limit. The judge said, we're going to stop. We're going to come back after the client has some time to collect himself on another day, and we're going to come back and we're going to rehear this case because I think he's hit his limit and the wall for the day. I have actually seen that type of compassion extended and several times. Uh,
Wow, that's amazing.
It really was. It was very nice. She was very kind. She could clearly, this is a man who has some special needs. And I think she was very attuned to that and she could see it. She
Yeah.
knew that that's not really the response that he wanted. He's been in custody for a very long time.
Mm.
And I thought it was very kind.
Yes. Yes. It's nice when you come across a judge who has that compassion, that sense of humanity, right? For the
Yes.
Mhm.
And it was interesting when I sat through the 4 hours of, when I was stuck in that courtroom, the judge was also very kind. We had a lot of people who were self-petitioning for asylums, and she would get to their stuff and she'd say, this is not strong enough. We're going to come back when you've had time to get yourself together and you
Mm.
make your paperwork stronger. She could have
Mm.
thrown them out, but she didn't.
That's impressive.
I was surprised by that. She basically said, are you here with legal counsel? Some of them were not. Actually never met anybody who self-petitioned for an asylum, but there were a few clients who did. And I was really surprised. She'd say like, oh, this is missing, or you filed this paperwork is incorrectly filled out. I'd like you to go back and reapply. The other thing that she did, which was really interesting, was she said is, why did you not apply for asylum in the countries that you crossed on the way here? So
Mhm.
why didn't you apply when you were coming from Honduras? Why didn't you apply in Mexico?
Mhm.
I've never heard that asked before either. And every single client that they came across, why did you apply for asylum in Colombia? Do you apply for asylum in Costa Rica? It was like, and they were all like, no, no, no. So
Well,
I thought that was really interesting that she asked that.
now I imagine that with your experience and the questions that they ask you, perhaps it's shaped or changed the way that you approach evaluations, that perhaps you might address some things in your reports based on the questions that you've been asked in testimony so that you're not asked that question, right?
I had started adding why they didn't apply for asylum in whatever
You have.
country they crossed in my reports.
Interesting. And what
Like,
what
oh,
other things?
I'll just business off at the pass.
Right, 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 right. So what other things did you start incorporating into the reports or how it's changed the way that you approach evaluations in general?
Credibility. So, and this is my personal like diatribe about the word credibility. As a clinical social worker and as a forensic psychologist, I'm sure you and I both feel very comfortable addressing issues of credibility. Lawyers seem to think that it's a trademark word that only they may use. And like, you do not own that word. You do not have the rights to it. So I have often put in, there is a section in my report that we talk about psychological credibility. We talk about backwards and forwards questions in my reports. How the client, I don't read, like, so let's say I'm doing an asylum. I don't read their I-589 petition until actually after I've interviewed them
How
because I
come?
don't want any preconceived notions when I'm going into my interview. I want to make sure that what they tell me, they actually have said in the I-589 at a different date.
Now,
Um,
if they didn't say it or they said something in the 589 that's inconsistent, how do you then call them afterwards and say, "Hey, this is
or I
inconsistent
ask
with
the
what you told
attorney,
me?"
like, hey, I've noticed that this, sometimes it's like, maybe it's a place name and maybe, not all my clients are literate.
Mhm,
So maybe they got a place name wrong or they
mhm.
remembered something wrong. Remember, some of my clients, have been in the United States since they were small children. So they only know what they've been told. If
Right.
they don't remember their journey to the United States and they've missed the DACA window, which is very easy to do, and now they're applying for a hardship or whatever, you know, I will come back and say, do you think that you remembered the name wrong? Or also trauma victims. They don't always remember things in a sequential way.
Right.
So, if I can account for that and it's, you know, that makes sense, then I don't go back. But, place names I don't get really worried about. Countries I do. So if you told
Mm,
me you came through Mexico, but you flew in from Haiti, there's a big difference. It doesn't happen very often.
mhm,
I just did a woman who was a schizophrenic,
mhm.
and the story that my interpreter and I received was so vastly different for
Mm-hmm.
than what she had put in her I-589. We actually had to, a nonprofit reached out to her family in Colombia, and because she hasn't been taking her medication, and said, what, can you give us background? Because she can't. She
Right.
can't give consistent background. And we talked about that in the report. Like, she is so flagrantly psychotic right now that you could tell her the sky is purple and she would say it's red.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. In those
unusual. You don't
cases,
usually see people in that level of psychosis.
right. 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 In those cases, I mean, collateral information is key for sure.
If you're ready to grow your income and impact, head to the link in the description box to learn more about my training program. For now, let's get back into the episode.
Now, speaking of credibility and malingering, I've come across some reports that are very heavy. They have a whole separate section on malingering and the assessment of malingering and saying this is, in so many paragraphs, how I've ruled out malingering, right?
I don't address malingering ever.
Okay. Tell me why, because I've got
Okay.
my reasons.
It goes back to my military background. During the time when I was a brigade commander, I was stationed at Fort Carson, and prior to me being there, we had a lot of soldiers who were accused of malingering, which they were, and it was such a big media frenzy. The Denver Post was all over Fort Carson, which is in Colorado. We were always doing meetings with the Denver Post, and we just stopped talking about it. And unless we were talking amongst ourselves, we never put an official report. I will, but I do things that I will say, trying to find the right words, that will sort of highlight when I feel a client is not credible.
Mm-hmm.
I will use the words like discrepancies that cannot be explained.
Mm-hmm.
And this doesn't happen most of my clients are pretty credible. U visas are the ones that I see the least amount of credibility.
Really?
And that's kind of interesting. Yes, we just did one recently where the police found him uncredible and our evaluator found him uncredible. It wasn't my case. I run a group practice, but he was like, this guy is lying. And the police report said, this guy is lying.
Oh no. Wow. But they still certified
we
it.
called the attorney. It's one we have a relationship with. And we're like, this guy's, you might want to think about this case.
Right.
Because it says so in the police report too. But when I'm evaluating somebody who I don't feel is credible, I will leave out big gaps. And I work with the same attorneys over and over and over again. And so I feel comfortable calling and saying, I have some real issues here, and here's what they are. Well, how would you like me to proceed? When we talk about clinical credibility, I'll say, a client had gaps that can't be explained by trauma. Their story was nonsensical, things like that.
Right.
But I think the client is faking it. What I will say is these are really elevated answers on a scale.
Right.
And we've stopped interviews with clients and said, like, hey, you have all fours on the, can we help you? I do scales in person. I do not give the clients the scales to do on their own. Because a lot of my clients are pretty unsophisticated and they struggle with what the question is.
That's right.
We do them, as part of our evaluation process, we do them and ask for do you understand what we're saying here?
Yes.
But if I have somebody going 4, 4, 4, 4, we'll stop and say, we really need to see a range. So I need you to think carefully about this.
Right.
So,
now, yeah, I mean, usually when the person's not credible, oftentimes you don't end up even writing a report. You would talk with the attorney and say, hey, here's the situation. Do you want me to keep going? And they might say, no, never mind. This was helpful enough. Maybe, write up a blurb, but I'm not going to use it, in court.
That is completely true. And because we, just like you probably do, we have really long-term relationships with people. They trust us.
Right. But conversely, I guess what I was referring to was the other way is just explaining why the person was indeed credible and why they're not malingering and having a whole section.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood
that.
your question.
Yeah. Do you do that?
Yes.
Or do you just mention it for these reasons? I found this person to be credible and moving on.
I talk about range of emotion, sharing painful material. It's really hard for, especially my sexual trauma victims, to really talk about it. I had one interview where she cried so hard that we ended up asking her the questions. It was a very literate client. She sobbed. She was a gay woman from India, and she just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And we ended up doing it in writing. We'd write her a question, she'd write her response. We'd
Mm.
write her a question, she'd write her response because
Wow.
she was so much flooding. And we talked about that. It is very unusual that we did it that way. But there was the
Uh-huh.
only, like, her dog was killed by like her ex-husband
Mm-hmm.
because she was gay and he was upset.
Mm.
He cut the brakes in her car, things like that. So much
Mm-hmm.
trauma, and we talked about like that she was absolutely inconsolable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
took big hourly breaks. Like, even with the questions, like, okay, we're going to come back. I think that took me 5 sessions to do that report, which was really unusual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Some
Um,
cases are really
so, so
heartbreaking.
we talk a lot about that too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So a lot of clinicians feel nervous about just the idea of testifying, especially for the first time. So what advice would you give to someone preparing for their first court appearance?
I would, if your attorney can't do a trial prep with you, find a friend, another clinician, a colleague who can, pretend to be and ask you hard questions.
I like that. Maybe somebody with
You
experience.
Yeah, like,
Mm-hmm.
like, do you know somebody who's been to court recently? Can they pretend to be the judge?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you
Can they
offer
pretend to do a
consultations?
trial?
If
What's that?
clinicians want to do that with you, do you offer consultations like that, or is
I'm
that not
sure I'd be
something you do?
happy to. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I do it. I have a small group of people I supervise who are immigration professionals, and they'll be like, can we practice? Or, um, but most nonprofits will do it. Private attorneys don't always have the time, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe their paralegal would.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Because they know what typical questions they would ask you,
Mhm.
and they have your report, so they can see any potential weaknesses.
The other thing you can ask is, has the attorney been in front of this judge before?
Mm,
Like,
right.
because some judges are notorious for being jerks.
That's right.
They're like, this person hates the word credibility, don't use it. I'm like, okay. So we
Yes.
talk about clinical consistency. That's my
Ah,
buzzword for credibility. They were clinically consistent because,
right. Right. There's so much that you get, yeah, from that, I guess, gossip, really,
yeah,
but it's just so helpful.
yes, it really is. Or, with the woman, the judge who gave my client the pass when he started yelling, deport me, I could say she was extremely compassionate. If you were
Yeah.
going in front of this judge, I was really impressed that she did this for this guy.
I've had judges like that, and I really was impressed and moved even by their reactions. And I've also had the extreme opposite
Oh,
experience
yeah.
as well, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So,
For me, one of the reasons I don't love going to court is because it makes me nervous. While I won't sleep well the night before.
hmm,
So I would also say, like, maybe self-care. What self-care are you doing for yourself? Like, maybe I'll treat myself after I get through court to a new manicure, or I'll have a bottle of wine. You have to take care of yourself too. And remember, it's really not a reflection of you. You can be the best clinician and not be a great testifier.
that's true. That's
You know,
absolutely true.
like, I know so many tremendous, diagnosticians who can't write.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
you don't have to be good at everything all of the time.
Mm-hmm. Are there any like particular skills or mindsets that you think are especially important in this work?
To not take things personally.
Hmm.
My clients and I always have this running joke with immigration. I can never predict how immigration court's going to go. There are people who I think will be deported who are allowed to stay, and people who I think are, a shoo-in who get deported for like a cancellation removal. They're like, oh, now there's a deportation order. It's not a case I've testified in, but like turning to me like, yeah, well, now they have a deportation order. I'm like, oh, great. So I have given up my crystal ball of immigration court, but it can be so variable. We joke that it could be what the judge had for lunch that day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
You
no,
never
don't
know.
take things personally,
Don't take it
is what you're
personally.
saying.
Um, don't fortune tell.
Mm.
Maybe they really like you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that my military background sort of helps me look less flaky to judges.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in my bio, so like I don't know how I could like not say I was in the Army for 20 years.
Right.
But I think that that's something that maybe puts them at ease, that maybe we have a common language and I'm a less emotionally driven clinician.
Right. 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 What do
Because
you
the
think
one
are
thing you
some
need to have some objectivity. It's not about you, it's about them, and you're advocating for your client.
Well, that's the biggest issue, isn't it? You need to come across as objective and neutral and not as an advocate. The advocate is the attorney, the client's attorney, and you need to be, as objective as you can. And which is why, going back to this whole section on malingering and credibility, if you overly stress that, it almost makes you sound like you're trying to convince the reader, like, no, but believe me, this is
Right.
this is accurate, this person is credible, without them even asking you. So the reason I include just a mention of it, if they bring that into question, then okay, we'll go to court and I can explain further. But if I do it in a report ahead of time, then I run the risk of coming across as like really like going above and beyond trying to convince the reader that this person is credible. Is the feedback that I've gotten from attorneys.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I always say to the people that I supervise, you want to show, not tell.
Yes. Ooh, I love that. I love that.
Show in your writing how they are credible. And you don't need to tell somebody, just show them.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say, when writing reports, I say your report has to answer questions, not elicit more questions. So when
Very
I'm
true. That's
right.
very true.
And when I'm editing a report, I read it from the mindset of an immigration officer or immigration judge, and I try to poke holes in it. That's my technique. And so if there are some things that are very obvious and that elicit another question, I would want the report to address it. Now, with that said, you also don't want to go overboard
Right.
because then it crosses that line where you're really almost, it sounds like you're trying to convince the reader of something an objection that they haven't even raised in the first place. So that makes it
Exactly.
sound, it's like saying like, I'm not hiding anything. I didn't do anything, before anyone even accuses you of doing that. And saying like
I
nothing.
also say that you need to write to the lowest level reader. So you don't know, sometimes USIS agents may be the only people reading your report. And you
Yes.
don't know their background. So it has to be something that's clear and understandable.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess from your experience testifying, this from situations where perhaps you were asked about these things. And again, that sort of changed the way that you write it in a report.
That's correct. Yeah. Because I remember when I was our military officer, I had written something with very like clinical language, and the commander's like, "What the hell does this mean?" I'm
Yes,
like, "Okay, well, we're not doing that anymore."
that's
You
right.
know,
That's right.
this
Yeah,
is
you're
not
right.
social work school.
You write for the reader, and the reader is not in social work school. Yeah,
No, there
absolutely.
is not in social work school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, well, you brought such valuable insights today from your background to your courtroom experiences, especially the unique lens of video testimony, right? So, but before we wrap up, what message would you want other clinicians to take away about the role that we can play in supporting immigrants through the legal system?
To know that you're the expert on your field in that moment, and not to be scared to use your voice.
I love that. I really love that.
We're all helpers. We all want to help. And sometimes the best way you can help is by, you know, standing up for your report
Yes. Yes.
and
Absolutely.
not be afraid.
Mm-hmm. Because you didn't do anything wrong.
Right. And if you want to practice, like watch some Judge Judy. Like seriously, like watch the judge grill those attorneys. And then like, that's not going to happen to you. I mean, very rarely do I have a judge who grills me, but it really doesn't happen.
Mhm.
They're more interested in the attorney's the one who's really going to take the brunt of the argument, not you.
Right.
You're there to enhance their argument.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Absolutely. You're there to educate, to explain, to help.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you again for
Oh,
sharing your time, your wisdom. I know that these insights will be incredibly meaningful for clinicians who are stepping into this work. So thank you.
well, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Great. Thank you again to Gabrielle for sharing her expertise and experiences with us today. Her insights into testifying in immigration court, especially through the unique lens of video testimony, highlight just how important the role of mental health professionals is in supporting immigrants navigating the legal system. I hope this conversation encourages clinicians to feel more confident about the impact that they can have, both in their evaluations and in the courtroom. If today's conversation sparked questions for you, I want to remind you that I offer one-on-one consultations, as well as a monthly consultation group, where we dive into real cases and share strategies together. These are great spaces to build confidence and get support as you step into this work. So please feel free to reach out if you'd like to join us. And thank you all for being part of this conversation today.
I appreciate you spending time with me today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a fellow mental health provider who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss my next one. See you then.